This is a sign that evokes our tenderness, our vulnerability. The sun moved into Cancer on June 21st, bang on the solstice. So you might have had an extreme catalyst. And this may have tempted you to close down, to clam up like the crab, the symbol of Cancer, to withdraw, to go into self-protection mode and hide in your shell, simply because it's familiar, it feels safe. But when we keep up a shield, it can keep out not just the bad, but also the good. So this is about being discerning and finding womb spaces with those who will honor your vulnerability, such as sitting in the red tent, so that you have support to process the wounds of the inner child. That's what's up at the moment. This means doing the inner work. The inner child needs to feel held by community in order to heal. The inner child needs to feel a sense of belonging to something greater, to clan, as much as we need air, food, water, and shelter. We cannot heal the wounded child within us without the support and connection of loving community. And due to the legacy of colonization of the tribes that were our ancestors, most of us have grown up without this strong sense of belonging to a clan, being held by the strength of kin. Colonization has resulted in most of us being undermothered. That isn't to blame our mothers. Countless generations of women have mothered in isolation without adequate emotional and psychological support. So they were all doing the best they could, but it has handed down endemic trauma down through the lineage. And we are the final result of that. We are the walking wounded. The role of the mother, as I've said, was undervalued. So women sought validation outside of the home through being recognised for their achievements. And this has led many of us to overlook our needs because we're so desperate to attain external measures of success to validate our very worth. Finally, not knowing what nurturance truly looks like, to feel that we are with someone that's truly present emotionally and psychologically, someone who can midwife us. The word midwife means with woman. We need midwifing psychologically and emotionally as well as physically. So if we haven't had that modeled, if we haven't sat in the red tent since we started cycling with the moon as a pre-teen, we don't even know what that looks like. So how can we embody it? So, dare I say it, we have undermothered our children as well, and they carry the wound. This isn't for us to whip ourselves with mother guilt. This is simply for us to acknowledge that we are all the perpetrator and the victim. So, what's our way out of this? Good old Kali Ma, the Black Madonna. This new moon in Cancer is conjunct her, bang on top of her, Black Moon Lilith. So this is our saviour. Yeah, this is who we pray to, the Black Madonna. Now, on April the 15th, she entered Cancer. And she will be in Cancer for the remainder of this year, 2022. So that's going to evoke all the shadow themes related to this sign, such as the feelings of abandonment by the mother or by those that we've emotionally bonded to, feelings of rejection, grief of separation, and from our adult children, those that are currently navigating the shadowlands of the underworld, those in their teens and 20s. That is a time of great anguish for a mother when they're individuating and often lost to us. And we have to trust that the values we've instilled in them will get them through. This is a time when our childhood wounds, as well as our mother guilt, may feel overwhelming. But this is an opportunity for us to resurrect the Black Madonna. If you haven't seen the film, oh gosh, someone help me out. Please unmute yourself and tell me, you know, with the big black horns. Maleficent, I got it. Maleficent. This would be a good time to rewatch Maleficent, because the first one I'm speaking of, this is very much about how she has been maligned, misunderstood, and misrepresented. The musical Wicked is also about that. So we can see, coming ready or not, the goddess is returning, including the dark goddess who has been scapegoated and blamed for all of society's ills. So it is time for us to heal the mother wound, mother guilt, and those that are not physical mothers, guess what? You've still got that. And the way that it's hooked into is, I'm not doing enough to save the earth. That's a narrative that's being constantly perpetuated. Yeah? That we must whip ourselves, that it's our fault that the earth is in such a mess. And that keeps us in such a state of powerlessness that we're actually passive to affect change. So it's time to turn that ship around, because when we have feelings of guilt, we attract struggle, because on a subconscious level, we think we deserve to be punished. We deserve to be locked up. After all, when we're in lockdown, there's less pollution. We actually buy into that. So this is time for us to let go of mother guilt. This might be the biggest, gnarliest lesson the collective feminine has ever had to face. But check out that incredible artwork. Crucifixion, it's called, by Eric Drucker. That's what's been happening within all of us, creating hysteria, resulting in hysterectomies, resulting in menstrual pain, resulting in guilt. We have become complicit in our own punishment by the mother archetype becoming mother superior. She who punishes ourselves, self-flagellation, because we've internalized an unrealistic expectation on ourselves, thinking we must give and never take. We must be all things to all people. And then we crucify ourselves for the suffering of our children. It's inevitable our children suffer. They take on physical form in order to journey the shadowlands in 3D. It is not our fault. Equally, it's not our fault that our children are undermothered. The structure of our society sets us up to fail. Children need a village, so do mothers. We've been doing it in isolation, and now that must stop. So how do we stop the destructive cycle of persecution for not being perfect as mothers, as caretakers of the earth, and as daughters? And how do we as daughters receive the nurturance and acceptance we crave so that we can embrace ourselves wholeheartedly, knowing we deserve to be loved? Of course, it's through community, through the love of clan and kinship, because it takes a village not just to raise a child, but to raise ourselves from the depths of despair, to resurrect. That is the role of the red tent. Regardless of where we hail from, we are the one family, indigenous to the Great Mother. We are not trespassing. You know, every time I go to an event and they do a welcome acknowledging the Indigenous custodians, I want to yell out and say, I will acknowledge them, but I also want to acknowledge my ancestors. I am indigenous to the earth. I am not trespassing. I have nothing to feel guilty for. It is time for us to acknowledge we are sacred. And on that note, I'll jump off my milk crate end of sermon from the Mount of Venus. Sorry, all the quips, it's not going to stop. And why would it want to? Anyway, I'm going to share with you the story of Demeter and Persephone. Now, I know many of you know this, but every time we hear a myth, we hear different things in it. Yeah? So it starts off, do I read it or do I speak it? Let me just tune in. I've got written versions. No, I'm going to speak it. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a woman who we know as Demeter, and she tended to every plant, to all the fields of all the nourishing foods that sustain life. And she did this by understanding the power of the cycles. Yeah, she was, if you will, a biodynamic farmer. She knew when to plant. She knew when to nourish the soil with her blood as a giveaway ceremony. And she sang into the song lines. She had a symbiotic, sacred relationship with the earth. She understood the earth needed her as much as she needed the earth. And she had a beautiful daughter who she called Kore, as in an apple core, an apple being the fruit of wisdom sacred to the goddess. And she taught Kore how to care for herself by understanding the cycles. In summer, you need to drink more. In winter, you need to wear a singlet and tuck it into your underpants so your kidneys are covered, just as our mums did for us. The cycles of change came and came again and came again until Kore had reached the age where she was crossing the threshold from girl to woman. And she was called by the moon one night out of her bed, and she found under the light of the moon this exotic bloom, this flower like no other she'd ever seen. It was a narcissus flower. Now, for all of us that have had relationships in our maidenhood with narcissistic folk, i.e. those that are inner child or wounded child dominant, and it's all about me, 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 you will know what happened when she plucked that flower. She got taken to the underworld. She experienced emotional, psychological, energetic, and maybe physical abuse, as many of us have in our maidenhood, particularly in these patriarchal times. And she suffered, and she was so alone, and she missed her mum. Meanwhile, Demeter realizes that her daughter is gone, and she is beside herself. She can't protect her daughter as she once could from the dark. She doesn't know how her daughter disappeared. She doesn't understand. She thought her daughter was happy living with her. She thinks it's her fault. So she goes to visit Hecate, the wise woman, the grandmother, at new moon, on the understanding that that's when she is most able to be connected with. Because the inner wise woman, she is ephemeral. She's hard to see, hard to know. But when the psychic activity is still at new moon, hot flush, it's easier to go in and meet with the inner wise woman. So she asks Hecate within, what happened? And intuitively she receives that your daughter has been taken to the underworld, that it was time, it was inevitable, there was nothing you could do, and that your lesson is to let go, is to cast the burden, to put her in the hands of the Great Mother. Yeah, so that the Great Mother can guide her intuitively. On the understanding that when it is time, when she has been able to swallow the bitter seeds, to digest the bitter lessons of all that she has experienced in the underworld, she will return, just as we did. But nothing we do can rush that. You can't hurry love, to quote Diana Ross. You can't hurry anything. Everything has its season and its reason. So she accepts that all I can do is pray for her, because if I worry, I actually manifest the worst for her. And eventually, in time, she returned, not as Kore, not as the girl that she once knew, but as Persephone, the queen, a woman who knew herself in her own right, who wasn't looking to others to save her. She had seen the darkness in herself. She had seen how she also could be abusive with her words, with her actions, with her thinking towards herself and towards others. So when she was reunited with her mother, they had a richness between them that wasn't there before, and that could only have been there because of their descent. This, I feel, is the matriarchal telling of this tale. The patriarchal version is that she was abducted by Hades, the lord of the underworld, that he raped her, that her father, Zeus, was complicit by telling Hades he could have her as a child bride. And this sets up a story and expectation of betrayal by the masculine towards the feminine. It is time for us to rewrite this story. It is inevitable that our girls, our daughters, and ourselves as daughters visit the underworld. For the underworld was once called the Great Womb. Yes, it is a place of death, just as the unfertilized eggs in our womb die and are released through our Graal, through our sacred blood. But it is also a place of rebirth. There must be a death for there to be a birth. It is the one crossroads, two sides of the one coin. So we bless their death. May they have a good death. All of those beautiful maidens right now around the world that are struggling in abusive situations, regardless of their chronological age. Because every woman who hasn't been initiated into the red tent, into a welcome to her womanhood, is still a maiden, psychologically and emotionally, is still living with the torment of internal abuse, and is therefore susceptible to making choices that end up in her being abused in her lives.